What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're gonna complete our review of Jeremiah Johnston on capturing Christianity. In this particular section, Jeremiah is going to discuss what he considers to be the quote-unquote best argument against the resurrection of Jesus. He is, of course, just going to dismiss this best argument because to him, the best argument is that Jesus actually resurrected from the dead. He is also going to say that most, if not all, scholars have just foregone all natural explanations for the resurrection story. And today we're going to find out why he does that. We're also going to be reading the pertinent portion of his book that concerns mythicism and see what he actually says about the mythicist hypothesis. So if you want to fuck around and find out how bad Jeremiah Johnston is going to fuck up today, then please stay tuned.
In your answer that we've got to read authorities on these issues. Like I've given my life the last 20 years to study this issue. I've read everything there is to read related to the resurrection of Jesus. I've read more stuff related to critical inquiry related to the resurrection.
I want that to echo through your mind. Honey, do you remember him? Remember him saying that. He's read all the critical scholarship on the resurrection. He's done all the research. He knows it all. Okay? Keep that in mind because he's about to fuck your brain.
The priesthood of the believer. You do what the Lord leads you to do and what's best for your family.
So we have an interesting question sent in by Maverick Christian. He says, best objection against your position, and then what is your rebuttal?
Best objection against which position? Like one of my arguments or...
Yeah, I mean, you can just, I suppose, pick one. He just said your position, so you can just pick one. You can pick.
Here's what it is. What I'm dealing with right now, honestly, is not it's not all the naturalistic theories because they're so unbelievable, honestly. What I'm dealing with now are apathetic critical scholars who believe. They believe that the early disciples believed they saw the resurrected Christ. They just don't care.
He said that basically scholars have shucked natural explanations for the resurrection of Jesus, and they are now apathetic about it. Apparently, the natural explanations for things is so underwhelming compared to the actual resurrection of Jesus that scholars have just abandoned them. You fucking kidding me right now? This is the kind of shit that I'm talking about when I discuss the fact that Jeremiah Johnston is not a scholar that you should trust at face value, that you have to be critical of what he says. You have to be skeptical about every claim that he makes. The natural explanations for the resurrection are being dropped by scholars. I would need a citation on that.
So they don't disbelieve for historical reasons. They disbelieve either for theological reasons or personal reasons, not related to the historical accounts. You can't disbelieve the resurrection on historical. If you make a decision based on probabilities, the historical information leads you to make that decision. But the biggest issue that I deal with,
you can't not believe in the resurrection, the magical resurrection of a Jew in the first century due to historical reasons. Now, keep in mind, remember, he's read all the critical scholarship. He's read all of the skeptical scholarship out there. And apparently, there's just simply no case to be made historically that Jesus didn't resurrect. I have to say, I have found contrary evidence because I have found scholars espousing the mainstream ideas, which when put together come to Jesus most likely didn't resurrect.
Is the apathy around it, meaning, yeah, they did, and I believe they did, but I just don't care. And so that's where, again,
that's actually not true. It's that they can't make a determination of what they saw or what they experienced or anything like that. So apathy maybe, but it's really more of we just don't have the evidence to make a solid conclusion.
We have to be so good about having faith conversations with these individuals to explain what stands and what falls with the Christian faith, why it actually is relevant to their life if Jesus physically, bodily rose from the grave. And so I think that's the biggest comeback right now in scholarship that, again, we need to deal with. These scholars are now conceding, yep, I believe they did. All the historical information, the best historical information that we have, tells us that these early followers, early doubters, and early objectors had experiences of following and seeing a resurrected Savior. Those experiences changed their life and radically transformed their community, but I wasn't there, so I really don't know what to say. I don't know what the reality was of it.
So basically, he's presenting all of these scholars as agreeing with him about some shit, and then they just, for whatever fucking reason, they don't believe in it. And so he's presenting it this way to make it seem like they don't have good reasons to deny the resurrection, other than they just don't want to believe in it, which is a total misrepresentation. And I do not forgive you, honey, one bit for making me see Guy Fieri when I look at him. He's going to take us to Flavortown.
And so that's the biggest comeback that I'm seeing. And if I ever write a sequel, I'm going to dive into that, because that's a conversation that is on a whole nother level of essentially the relevance, what stands and what falls with the resurrection. Why should we care and why don't we? I mean, that's why I actually didn't take that much time to talk about the naturalistic explanations, because so few people hold to them today.
So few people hold to the naturalistic explanations about Jesus and his resurrection. Like, I don't even know how to process that fucking dumb statement, because if he's talking about Christians, obviously they're not going to hold to naturalistic explanations. If he's talking about skeptics, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, because the naturalistic explanations are always going to be way more likely than the supernatural explanation of magical Jew resurrection. This is what I'm talking about, with New Testament scholars not being able to be trusted whenever they make claims. It gets to a point where every time they say something, you have to be critical of what they say. Jeremiah Johnston is a perfect example of this, because he sits there and he purports to be a scholar. He presents himself as a scholar in the scholarly community, doing the hard work of scholars by reading a bunch of fucking journal articles and papers. And he's read all of them, all the critical and skeptical scholars. He's read all of them. None of them espouse natural explanations for shit. I have to sit there and be like, are you sure? I feel like you're twisting information, because I mean, I've never once seen these scholars be like, oh yeah, magical Jew resurrection's way more likely.
By people, I mean scholars who are published. You know, I took one chapter to explain deceit theories, alternative explanation theories. Of course, the mythicist camp I had to do 2 pages on, which probably was too much.
Oh, he did 2 pages on that? Well, fuck me in the ass. We're going to read exactly what he wrote. Let's see, what did he write exactly about mythicism? And it is a little big and long. Giggity. Well, yeah, it just spans 2 pages. Mythicism is regarded as eccentric, and this view is held by almost no historian or credible scholar. So starting off with a appeal to authority fallacy, or popularity rather. The evidence for the existence of a historical person known as Jesus from the Galilean village of Nazareth, who was a public figure for a year or 2, then after a confrontation with authorities in Jerusalem died on a Roman cross, is substantial. No, it's not. Not even on the Roman cross and all this other stuff, it's not substantial. Not only were 4 biographies written, 4 biographies were written and circulated within 1 or 2 generations of his time, but we have the letters of Paul, a contemporary, who knew some of Jesus's original followers, including Peter and John. Actually, Paul does not say that they were original followers of Jesus, just that they also received visions of Jesus, and that's it. Paul never indicates them as disciples, only apostles, and was acquainted with Jesus's brother James, which is bullshit, but you know, that's another argument. Almost all scholars accept as authentic several of Paul's letters. For example, Peter and John. No one doubts that Paul was a contemporary of these men. The idea that he could be talking about a brother of Jesus and the original followers of Jesus, and yet this Jesus was not a real person, strikes many as absurd. Well, that's why you got to read the secondary literature there, dipshit. You know, do scholar shit for once. Some mythicists go so far as to claim that there was no village called Nazareth in the early 1st century. Oh, well, hot diggity damn, that is not an argument made by minimal mythicism, which is the only academically supported mythicist argument. So it kind of seems like if you're talking about scholars, you're purporting to be a scholar, and you're claimed to only be looking at the scholarship in everything that you do, maybe you should also only be looking at the fucking scholarship that's academically supported. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just so fucking weird with, you know, expectations or something, but I would think that if you're all about the scholarship up until this point, maybe that says something about you. No archaeologist agrees with such an extreme hypothesis. Indeed, they point to a 4th century Jewish inscription found in Caesarea Maritima, a major city in Israel's Mediterranean coast where the Roman governors resided, which lists groups of priests, including those of Nazareth. I know many archaeologists, Jewish, Christian, and of no religious orientation whatsoever, and no one doubts that Jesus was a real person. Oh, well, fuck, if they don't doubt it, then it's gotta be true. Indeed, the vast majority of these archaeologists view the Gospels as providing valuable historical data, which I have to say, that's not wrong. This is an argument from false authority, is basically what he's doing there, because it's the archaeologists, like, say that there's historical data. I mean, there's not going to be archaeological data for Jesus, so there's no point in consulting the archaeologist. So I don't know why he's doing that, but in any case, like, even Dr. Bert Ehrman believes that there's historical data in the Gospels, but in order to claim that there is historical data in the Gospels, he has to invent at least 3 other sources that don't have any evidence for their existence and say that they are independent eyewitness testimony. Fictitious narratives about a mythical figure from a non-existent village would not inhibit the reality that archaeologists and historians find in the New Testament Gospels. Oh, well, fuck me! Accordingly, mainstream scholars accept the historical authenticity of Jesus, and so should we. Jeremiah Johnston, Body of Proof, pages 38 and 39, Baker Publishing Group. Baker Publishing Group is an independent publishing group where for $8,000, as long as your stuff is less than 70,000 words, you can get your shit published through Baker Publishing for $8,000. I don't care to spend that much, but I could publish through Baker Publishing that says Jeremiah Johnston, you know, isn't a real historian or something. That would be factually true. But I mean, as long as it's less than 70,000 words, I want to pay $8,000 for it. I can get it published through there. My point in bringing all that up is that there's no other criteria for publishing through this publisher. As long as you have the $8,000, you can get published through them. That's my point. There's no fact checking. There's nothing of it. So you just have $8,000 and you can publish.
And then, of course, the mass hallucination. I mean, nobody ascribes to those. What I'm seeing is just what
Casey asked, doesn't he have to actually do real work for a PhD? He did do real work. He did do a dissertation where he takes the Gospel of Peter. That's the gospel that has Jesus that's like as big as a transformer walking out of the tomb, and then an anthropomorphic cross that walks out too. He uses that account to prove the resurrection. Yeah, and it got published. You know who it got published through? Baker Publishing.
Oh, I was going to say Highlights magazine.
Highlights? No, Baker published it, which I just got done explaining that Baker Publishing, you just have to have $8,000.
we said, this apathy about, okay, well, ho-hum, let's move on with our life, doesn't really affect me.
So for me, what are we to do with the 500 eyewitnesses accounts that are just hearsay accounts from Paul? Cameron, I love your videos.
Okay, so this is interesting. I did want to highlight this. So this is the 500 eyewitnesses, right? Total hearsay. It's just Paul repeating something that he heard. Okay. There's no evidence for it. In fact, there's actually better evidence that this could be a scribal error that turned appearing over the Pentecost to appearing to 500. But also the fact that he doesn't give any kind of identifying information, and there's no way to actually reference these people or like find these people in the ancient world, makes it very weak evidence. So He's about to explain the 500 witnesses.
Distracted when he started licking Cameron's butthole.
KC said that she got distracted when he started licking Cameron's butthole.
Thank you for asking this. So the question is the way it was posed, the hearsay related to the 500. And I want to just remind you of the source of the 500. That's Saul of Tarsus. That's 1 Corinthians 15. That's an uncontested epistle of Paul. What do I mean by uncontested? Well, the pastorals are contested epistles. Some scholars say Paul didn't write them. But 1 Corinthians and Galatians, the two primary texts that Paul gets his resurrection tradition from, remember, he says, I'm giving to you what was given to me. So here's, again, for me, I wouldn't call it hearsay because of the source. Paul, who's taken more seriously in that chapter, is more respected by scholars. And I don't mean just like confessing scholars. I mean, anyone who studies the Bible terminally takes 1 Corinthians 15 at face value. And so
all scholars, whether they're Christian scholars or not, they take 1 Corinthians 15 at face value. What? Like, what does that mean at face value? Because as far as like what Paul actually says in the beginning in his Pauline Creed, I take that at face value because Paul says that he got this information from the scriptures. They don't take it at face value because they like to interpret it as in accordance with the scriptures, which is not what the original Greek said, which is not what Paul would have written. Paul wrote according to the scriptures. And you can go and you can look at the Greek interlinear version of this text, and you can see that it says according to the scriptures. It's not in accordance with, as if it was done and then later figured out that it was in accordance with the scriptures or something like that, like some kind of fulfilled prophecy. Paul only knows about this shit because the scripture said it would happen. That's how he knows. But also, if you follow it, Jesus first appeared to Peter. Now, you may be like, oh yeah, sure, of course, Peter. But for a guy that believes that the Gospels are eyewitness testimony, why would Paul say that Peter was the first one to get revelation of Jesus? Why do you think that would be, honey? Because we all know that the women were the first one to get revelation of Jesus. He actually mentions this as something that a PhD student can do all the research on now. Why didn't Paul mention the women? What are the good reasons as to why Paul didn't mention women?
Fuck about the women.
No one gives a fuck about the women. That's right. It's very interesting that he only partially takes Paul at his word, for one. For two, he makes the dubious claim that all scholars take this at face value. I do believe that there are Christian scholars that rate this as poor evidence, that they don't even consider this evidence of revelation because it's just hearsay. But Mr. I've read all of the fucking shit over here seems to not know about it, or at least not want to acknowledge it. So we're left with a couple of choices here for Jeremiah Johnston, J squared, J dipshit. He's either incompetent as a scholar and historian, or not historian, sorry, New Testament scholar, biblical scholar, whatever. He's either incompetent or he's lying to us. Because if he just simply doesn't know about the responses, if he doesn't know about people from his own camp that don't count this as evidence, then that makes him incompetent. So even if you're charitable with this, he still comes off as incompetent.
Well, so he is incompetent, but he's also lying about having read all the scholarship about this. That's obviously a lie.
Yeah, it's obvious that he hasn't done it. So he's definitely lying about that. But he's either incompetent or he's lying about this 500 witnesses thing.
That's the source of the 500. The thing that's fascinating to me, though, I would just add this, like if you and I, whoever asked this question, were having coffee together, I would just say, okay, why does Paul not list the women as witnesses? Don't you find that interesting? When he gets into his appearance tradition after verse 4, so verses 5 through 8, he gives this amazing list of appearances. He never once mentions the women, which I just think is fascinating. So I haven't done enough work in that right now to write a chapter on it. But again, if I do a sequel, I'm definitely going to dive into why did Paul not mention the women? That's more the question I have. I take at face value the 500 because Paul says you can go talk to them today. Most of them are alive, though some have fallen asleep. Again, that's sleep in Jesus, koimao. I mentioned that earlier.
I don't know if this is true because he said that he mentioned it earlier or whatnot about the sleep part, he says that Christians invented the word cemetery. I don't know if that's true or not. But see, this is the problem with New Testament scholars. I don't know if that's true. Like, I can't trust that what he's telling me is the truth or is accurate. One of the two. I hate that it is that way. I wish that I could rely on New Testament and biblical scholars to give me good information. But yeah, well, that's what he was saying, that Christians made up that word, koimen.
It's taken from a Greek word. I don't know. Apparently, there were no other grounds to bury the dead. Only the church was allowed to bury the dead in Europe.
So maybe it's true. Yeah, I mean, it could be true. This is my point on this particular subject. I don't know if what he's saying is true. And it's really inconsequential to the rest of it, right? He's sitting there saying that, 500 people that you can contact now. And he's like, well, Paul says you can contact them, so I guess you know who they are. And it's like, who the fuck are these people? How would be able to contact them? How would we, if we now can't be on the lookout for people that would have witnessed this in the 500, how would people then know if some fuck was part of the 500? We can't know. And he's just sitting there acting like, oh yeah, you could totally talk to these motherfuckers. Go in there, you can jerk one of them off. There's no identifying information there. And I've heard apologists just spuriously make up information at that point. They're saying, well, everybody just knew who they were, even though they didn't say anything. It's like, okay, that could be a possibility that everybody just knew who they were, but that's not in the evidence. We don't have evidence of everybody just knowing who they are. We don't have evidence of that. We don't have anybody saying that. We don't have anybody giving that kind of indication. So there's no reason to ad hoc suggest it.
But I'm fascinated why all four Gospels mention female witnesses of the empty tomb or appearance tradition. Why does Paul omit that entirely?
Interesting question there, J squared J dipshit, because the answer is because of the theme, the least shall be first. Mark used it as well as the other Gospels. The least shall be first. It's actually used throughout the Old Testament too. God regularly used the least among his chosen people in order to emphasize his influence over the events. So using women being the least of the society, the least of the Jews, women regarded as the least of the Jews, using them to find and have the first revelation of Jesus is a big thing that fits directly in the theme of the least shall be first. So you want to know why Paul doesn't mention it? Because it was invented after Paul. Nobody mentions it before the Gospels, so it seems like it was either invented with the Gospels or invented in the oral traditions that inspired the Gospels. It's a simple fucking question that's been answered. But him, Mr. I've read all the scholarship, doesn't fucking know about it? He doesn't know about the simplest explanation for that shit? I'm sorry. I can't believe that he's actually done research on this. He has not done any kind of real scholarly work on this topic. He has looked at people that already agree with him and has written about them in a book. Sorry, Exa Music in the chat saying what oral traditions? Oral traditions would have circulated prior, like oral traditions are the easiest ones to circulate. So it's speculated, of course, that oral traditions are what first circulated. But there's actually good evidence for oral traditions because Paul talks about Christians before there's any kind of story or anything or any kind of theology about Christianity written down. Paul's actually our only evidence of the Christian theology. So we have indirect evidence through Paul that there were people that were passing along oral traditions prior to the Gospels being written. So there's a good reason to think that there's oral traditions, but obviously we're not going to know what those oral traditions were. And because we don't know what those oral traditions were, we don't know if they're eyewitness accounts. There's no way for us to scrutinize them, and there's no way to know what is oral tradition versus what is written down and that we have just lost. So it's really just a mystery bag full of bullshit that you have to stick your hand in and mush around in order to figure out what the fucking situation was. Sorry for that vivid explanation. As for Cameron's video, I found it to be lacking in a lot of things. I found Jeremiah Johnston to definitely be lying about reading all the scholarship because he obviously hasn't. And if you read Body of Proof, you will notice that he doesn't engage in any kind of secondary literature or any literature that disagrees with him. He only presents literature that agrees with him already. And this is a very different from other scholars scholarly, even pop level books that you see out there, because they will actually engage with the opposition instead of doing what Jeremiah did, and that's not engage. He slightly engages at the very beginning, but when you get to the actual pieces of evidence that he presents, he just doesn't, it seems. I haven't read the book completely, so I could be wrong, I guess, but from what I've seen so far, he doesn't engage with alternative explanations. He only engages with magical Christian explanations. So there's that. As it turns out, Jeremiah is also either incompetent or he's lying about other things that he's talking about in this video. And I don't know which, but I would probably err on the side of caution and go with incompetent. But that's only because I don't want to call him a liar. Thank you, heathens, for watching today. If you will, please go down below and let me know in the comments section what you thought about Jeremiah Johnston's counter argument to the best argument against the resurrection. Also, while you're down there, let me know what you thought about his section on mythicism. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.